Well, hello there.
Hello.
Ladies and gentlemen. It's time! Two tricked out Wonder Nines. The top tier versions of already solid performing pistols that gives you the opportunity to pay more for one. A major showcase of when a company says, just have the other guy do it. Two pistols made famous from the 80s, 90s, and used by multiple militaries and law enforcement agencies worldwide. Pistols famous from countries for things famous in time. Well, they both ended up in the United States, really. And SIG has kind of bounced around and stuff. It's time for the 92G Elite LTT versus the SIG Sauer P226 Legion double action, single action. I'm not going to treat this like a normal pistol review, but the weights as they stack up, I weighed them as they sit in front of you, both with a full magazine of 18 rounds filled with 124 grain HST plus P, fully loaded. The LTT weighs in at 2 pounds, 14.3 ounces, with one more round to plus it up to 19 rounds is 2 pounds, 14.7 ounces. The SIG weighs in at 2 pounds, 12.8 ounces, with the same 18 rounds, and plussed up is 2 pounds, 13.3 ounces. So you'll notice a difference of 1.4 ounces across the loaded spectrum. Now, for something I'm going to get into later, I weighed the slides and the frames. The slides, so the Beretta weighed in at 1 pound, 2.1 ounces. The SIG weighed in at 1 pound and 1 ounce. I weighed the frames with the lights on them, but I also did some math to subtract 4.4 ounces. The M9A1 frame weighs in at 1 pound, 1.4 ounces. Minus the light, it weighs 13 ounces. The Legion weighs in at 1 pound, 1.1 ounce, and without the light weighs in at 12.7 ounces. Both pistols are remarkably close. I mean, super duper close. And the super duper close is the theme of this video. The SIG is taller, but the Beretta is longer. A sight radius is better on the Beretta, but the sights are better on the SIG. The frame is better on the SIG, but the slide serrations are better on the Beretta. The trigger on the LTT is smoother and lighter, but the SIG's single action reset and travel is much, much better. And for similarities, cocking the hammers feel just as sweet, and they cost about the same-ish. So let's dive into my experience before we get too far. The P226 in front of you, I have well over 4,500 rounds through varying charges and weights. And then with the Beretta, I'm at 1,500 rounds of varying charges and weights as well. Both pistols have been fed identically. All of the rounds that I've ever fired out of a 9mm, that was ammo that I purchased and I semi-approve of, even though some of the bullet weights are not what I would use, to include those weird Winchester silver tip 115 self-defense rounds that I use. That were all that I could find for any 9mm for a while, and I bought a couple hundred rounds of. So they both fired all those rounds. They both have functioned flawlessly. I have never had a stoppage or malfunction of any kind, because that's what I've used my entire career, and Todd G used them for his tests, which are the gold standard. Now, any serious use defensive pistol should not have any sort of stoppages or malfunctions that are firearm related, period. In those rounds, be it 4,500 or 1,500. You should expect a service pistol to go at least 5,000 rounds without maintenance, not without cleaning, without maintenance, i.e. switching recoil springs, any sort of internal parts, etc. So 5,000 rounds is the standard. I'm gonna tell you now that with military testing, the military variants of these, the SIG goes 30 to 35,000 rounds and the Beretta goes 15,000 rounds because of the locking block. But if you change the locking block and change the recoil spring regularly, the Beretta will also go that distance. So yes, the design on the SIG is more robust than the Beretta, but if you take care of the Beretta will last perfectly fine. Now, despite the fact that the SIG is slightly lighter than the Beretta, it doesn't feel that way when you're shooting, and honestly, I think the metal is much more dense on the slide. It is lighter because it's shorter, but it is thicker. And you can really tell when you're shooting the difference in recoil impulse between the two. They both shoot flat and smooth, don't get me wrong. That's with or without a light. They both shoot remarkably flat, remarkably smooth. And when I'm shooting steel, I can't tell a difference. I will say that just the recoil impulse feel, not necessarily the recoil pattern or anything like that, the SIG does feel smoother, but again, I think that's because of two things. The beaver tail and the way the slide is designed with its density really allows the pistol to tame the rounds very well. And it's a very, very pleasant shooting experience. Moving to the Beretta, the slide is very light, even though it is 1 ounce heavier, 1.1 ounce heavier, it's not in a way. Like, it doesn't feel as dense, it's not made out of the same material, and all the density is really just packed in right here versus the SIG, which has more material up front. And it gives it a more pleasant recoil impulse, but I really have to stress between these two pistols, shooting plus P and plus P plus ammo, the guns both behaved very similarly to the point where I could shoot both of them all day. If I had to run 400, 500, 600 rounds of plus P ammo, I'd be fine shooting them all day. Now, I mentioned shooting steel, they perform the same. Shooting paper is where we kind of ran into the differences. With the SIG, for some reason, I was able to shoot much tighter groups faster and easier. With the Beretta, I think the trigger's just a little too good and I need to spend more time with the Beretta. I will say it was very fluid going between the two guns. Usually when something has a much better trigger or the grip is fundamentally different on something else, you run into a snag. Like when you switch over, you're like, uh-oh, different gun. But for some reason, my brain was able to just run both of these. I think it's between how much time I've had with my Legion and how much time I have on a Beretta series pistol in general. My brain was able just to turn it on, turn it off, run each gun perfectly fine. When I shot the Beretta indoors, I noticed that the faster paced shooting is where it kind of fell apart, and that could be me and time with the gun, and it could just be the way that the SIG works is better for me.
And we'll put up with the retard in the meantime. Who's the retard? You.
But you don't say that.
I don't know. Shooting up close and slow fire, I made really nice tiny groups with both. And as I started to pick up the pace and move the distance back, it was very clear that I could shoot the SIG much better and faster, more defensive type shooting versus the Beretta. Now again, the Beretta is not a bad pistol, and I don't have as much time on the LTT that I do M9 service pistols. That said, I love this gun. I'm going to say that a lot to reinforce people because there are differences in these two guns that, for no reason on paper, but more how the gun fits me, the SIG just is easier for me to shoot and much better. But they both shoot very, very well. They're both worth the price that they command. It's nice to shoot steel. But when I started putting these guns on paper, the SIG really started to walk away from the Beretta.
Don't do this.
No. No.
I gotta say, I could have called this one.
No.
Yeah.
Is it our fault?
I don't know if the rounds that I had were just not what the Beretta barrel likes, and a lot of guys don't really put a lot of time into pistols and matching rounds to their barrels. Understandably so. I'm not saying be that level of autistic. I'm just saying that some barrels don't like certain loads.
Whose fault is it? Oh, fuck, I wanna fucking know!
Let's cut this shit. It is directly your fault.
And it's the difference between making a 4-inch group and a 2-inch group. Most people don't give a shit. Or they only shoot 115 grain practice ammo. So again, they don't give a shit. But I've noticed certain guns prefer 124 grain. I've noticed certain guns prefer 147s and so on and so forth. And certain rounds, like the HST, perform a certain way versus the Golden Saber and so on and so forth. I've fired a lot of pistol rounds, but generally speaking, both of these are capable of making nice, tight little groups. I will also tell you where the SIG does better for me versus the Beretta in a second.
I'm going to throw up. I think I'm gonna throw up.
Don't throw up.
But I'm going to cover the triggers right now because it's going to be important. The Beretta. So the Beretta trigger is by far and away superior to the SIG in every way but the reset. There's a lot of slop. The break weight and the sensation and the feel, superior. But the reset is where this gun falls down. I will say though, because this trigger is so phenomenal, it's so light and smooth, double action, there is zero, I mean zero stacking. It just flows through. And in the video, it's actually deceptive because watching the hammer fall looks like there's stacking, but there's not. Zero stacking, right? Single action. Very smooth and precise. Very easy to make nice, clean hits with. I know there's some people just upset that I dry fired my pistol so much.
I got a belly full of white dog crap in me. And now you laid this shit on me?
But we'll be okay. So ultimately, both feel and every academic measure that's quantifiable, both subjective and objective, this trigger should be by far and away superior to what the SIG has, because the SIG during dry fire and academically speaking is worse. It accelerates as you pull it, so it starts really heavy, then it gets progressively smoother. It doesn't really stack. When you pull it, it doesn't stack. So me going slowly is not good because it's me shaking through the trigger because it starts heavy and progressively lightens up as you pull through it, which is kind of annoying. It has a very snap feel. It's kind of like a cap gun in a lot of ways, but it's 10 pounds. So you pull through it and it's over. Also, the bow itself is much better on the SIG than on the Beretta. Even though the Beretta is rounded, it's not the same sort of interface. This has a very nice interface. It feels really nice, and you get very consistent on this trigger. Now, single action. Very tactile and audible, and it's ready to go immediately. I'm kind of like flicking it a little too hard. So it's right on the wall, like ready to go immediately. And it's very, very light. So it's light and precise, but it's right where I want it to be. It's around that 4.5 pound mark, maybe 4.25, and very, very precise. So when you're sitting in the store, or you're sitting at home, or you're doing any of that stuff, and you're dry firing or comparing the triggers or how everything works, the Beretta should be a clear runaway winner. But for some reason, the SIG trigger just fits me better, and I don't like the SIG trigger while I'm dry firing it. The double action is atrocious as far as I'm concerned. It's lighter than my HKs, most of them, but it's not, I don't know, it's just not as good as the Beretta trigger. But when you're live firing it, it just wakes up. It's kind of like shooting the P30. Everybody laments the trigger in the P30, but when they shoot it live fire, it's not an issue. Same thing with the SIG. The double action pulls, not great, but when you're out on the range shooting live fire, it just falls off. It just doesn't matter. And it doesn't negate the smoothness of the Beretta But for some reason, the Beretta just, it feels the same. So yes, it's great when you're dry firing and it's great when you're shooting live fire, but there's no difference. Whereas the SIG, for some reason, feels not that great when you're dry firing, and then when you're out at the range, it feels so much better. And it's really not something I can quantify, and most people prefer to shoot the SIG over the Beretta.
This house is a fucking prison!
On planet bullshit!
In the galaxy of this sucks camel dicks!
I've taken multiple people out, and I let them shoot both, and then people just keep asking to use the SIG. Now, onto the frame. For me, is an excellent frame. I love it. It fits my hand perfectly, and it drives right. It just feels like a Beretta should. I really like these egg-shaped figure 8 Valentina Nappy grips, and it feels really nice. Like, there's nothing to complain about until I pick up the Legion. For some reason, this feels better in hand, and there's elements of the grip that I like better. I really think SIG put more effort into the frame than Langdon put into the Beretta frame, but it funnels my hand where it's supposed to go. The beaver tail's longer, which is good. I feel like it gives you a little more recoil control. May not, but it feels that way. And the checkering goes all the way down. They also have reference checkering for when you get your other hand on there. You can roll into it and stop, and it's exactly where it needs to be. The other thing is the front of these grips kind of roll inwards. So again, it feeds your hand forward where it's supposed to be. And this undercut bevel is much better on the SIG than it is on the Beretta. Although I really appreciate what they did here with the Beretta. So while the SIG fits my hand better, it may not be the case for you. Your hands may not be shaped like my stubby little WAP hands, so we might each handle these guns and you may come away feeling differently than I do, but the way that the SIG grip is designed, it's much better for me. I also like the texture of the grip a lot better than the texture of this grip, although for a Beretta, this is what I prefer. So if you're listening to me talk, you're like, wow, you're really taking shots at the Beretta here. It's not really the case. I really, really like the LTT. It's just when up against the SIG just feels better for me in a lot of ways. But if you were gonna ask me what on a Beretta do you like, the LTT is gonna be a reference gun for me, or one of the Wilson combat guns, probably an M9A3 as well, if we're going down the Vertec route. But yeah, I know there's gonna be people that are upset. But they both come up naturally for me. The SIG just feels right while I'm shooting it versus the Beretta. And if I'm just shooting the Beretta by itself, I don't even, the SIG doesn't even enter my mind. But it's when I have both back to back that I start to notice the differences. So if I just take one or the other out, the other one's not in the equation. But when I'm shooting them side by side, I'm kind of forced to look at, why do I like this one better? Why do I shoot it better? Versus just enjoying them for what they are. And realistically, they both have MECGAR magazines, which is choice. They both have similar magazine capacities, although I'm not sure if SIG actually makes a 30 or 226. I know Beretta actually makes a 30 rounder. Some offshoot company might make it for SIG. I don't know. There's going to be some SIG guy in the comments that's like, actually, there's a 30 rounder from 1987. Like, okay, I'm sorry. I don't know. But those are the main differences for me. I've mentioned this before, I really don't like Ameriglo sights. And while I'm messing around with the Beretta in the house, it's okay. But I think once I start shooting the Ameriglos, both on the Beretta and the Glocks, I just hate Ameriglos. The SIG X-ray sights are very, very similar to Trijicon HDs, and they make Trijicon HDs for this pistol in the first place, so I can do that. And I much prefer those posts, although the SIG has to have a little bit of material relieved in the slide because it does the Glock 19 sunsetting thing. So part of the sight blade you can't see because it sunsets behind the slide. So That is annoying. That's something I don't like. But these X-ray sights and the Trijicon HDs are very, very similar. Whereas my eye does not like the Ameriglows. And my buddies and I are trying to figure it out because a couple of them have the same experiences where they shoot the Ameriglows and they're like, yeah, they're okay, but it's just not, it doesn't fit my eye right or something. I just don't, there's something not right about the Ameriglows. And I mean, it's not the difference between hitting the target and not, it's just, I feel like I can't shoot as tight with the Ameriglows and I can't really put my finger on it. I think it has something to do with the front sight, but I'm not sure yet. I'm still trying to nail it down. Some of you in the comments might be able to figure it out or know why, but I definitely prefer Trijicon HDs versus Ameriglows. But in the end,
it doesn't even matter.
They both get the job done and handily, easily. Both are superior firearms and you will be well served with either and or both, to be real with you. But for me, the SIG just does it better on the timer, under pressure, trying to do cleaner work, and I don't know why. I think it's the features that I highlighted while we were talking about it, but I'm not 100% sure. And it's not a barrel length thing or a slide length thing, so all you Glock 45 enthusiasts, don't say all that. And I definitely prefer a longer slide and a longer sight radius, but for some reason when shooting these two back to back, the SIG just did better. I need more time dedicated to the Beretta LTT. I've decided I'm going to take it out a lot more and shoot it a lot more. Before doing the review and working into this video, I was going to try to push it to 2,000 rounds, but I wanted to shoot other 9s and justify owning them, make sure I can still run them. And I have other guns, you know, so I didn't want to just dive into just shooting the Beretta, but I kind of need to. So don't be surprised in future rifle videos when you see the Beretta being the gun I transition to. And if anything, the SIG shooting better for me really puts a fire under my ass to purchase and run a Wilson Combat Brig Tack, because I think the way the Brig Tack is constructed with the heavier slide, where some people will say it bobbles more and it doesn't shoot as smooth, I think based on how I like things, it'll work better for me than the 92G LTT Elite, whatever, Elite LTT, whatever is supposed to go first. I don't really care. That gun, but that doesn't mean I shoot the LTT poorly. In fact, I shoot it quite well and I love this thing. I'm gonna shoot it more. I'm not getting rid of it. At the end of the day, I'm keeping both. I have 4 9mm platforms that I'm sticking with, and I'm gonna be diving deeper into Beretta, and I'm gonna be buying a few more copies of this gun as a backup. One to suppress, and the third one would be just a backup to not shoot, and then when one goes down while it's getting replacement parts and getting worked on, I have a spare that I can grab and it'll be ready to go. But really, if you're between these two guns, it's dealer's choice. If you have a bunch of SIGs and you shoot SIGs well, you're gonna shoot the Legion better. If you have a bunch of Berettas and you shoot Berettas well and you don't like SIG, guess what? You're gonna shoot the Beretta better. For me, I love both of these guns a lot, actually, and I shoot them both very well. It's just, for some reason, the SIG just shoots a little bit better for me. I know I've said it about 1,000 times in this video. I'm keeping both, so don't get scared, and I'm gonna be buying more Berettas. So I love the LTT, don't panic. Hopefully this video didn't piss you off.
You see that white dog crap?
Do you see it?
Yeah.
Not too fun down there, is it?
No. You see, your actions have consequences.
Thanks for watching. Take care out there.